Meteorologist Brian Bennett with your update on the tropics for your Wednesday, October 4th. We do now have Tropical Depression number 16 that has developed in the very southwestern Caribbean, just north of Panama and Costa Rica. Winds with the Tropical Depression are blowing right around 35 miles per hour. This big mess of showers and storms is moving off to the northwest near 7 miles per hour. You're probably asking yourself, here we are in October and we should be, buying pumpkins and forgetting about the hurricane season. But nope, October is still a busy time of year in the tropics. The peak of hurricane season is September 10th. Here we are, the first week of October, and yeah, it's less active than what we were looking at in September, and we're less likely to see a storm as strong as what we saw with Irma and Maria. But nonetheless, the tropics can still be fairly active and will continue to be so for a couple more weeks until we move into late October and early November. That's when the tropics really quiet down and the Gulf and the Atlantic are really just too cool to support very much development. Right now, you can see some development with Tropical Depression number 16, looking a bit more healthy than it did yesterday with nice counterclockwise circulation, but still not a defined center of circulation. And until we get that center of circulation, the models are not going to have a real good handle on exactly how strong this storm may become or exactly where it's going to head once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. Though it is in an area where we are looking at some pretty good natural spin. We have winds out of the west once we get down to Panama and Costa Rica, and the trade winds out of the north on the northern part of the storm, and that's helping with this counterclockwise development. Now, the National Hurricane Center has this depression becoming a tropical storm as it heads over Honduras and Nicaragua, and then remaining a tropical storm because of the influence from land, and then becoming a hurricane once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, the cone includes anywhere from Tampa Bay up through the Florida Panhandle, all the way to the southern tip of Mississippi, and even folks in Louisiana want to keep an eye on this storm as well, as anybody in the central and eastern Gulf of Mexico could be impacted by what could become Tropical Storm or Hurricane Nate as we move towards the weekend. The storm is developing exactly where we would expect it to develop in early October, which is in the southwestern Caribbean, just south of Cuba. We are looking at plenty of warm water for the storm to develop. We're looking at plenty of moisture as well. The water vapor imagery showing that we're not getting any dry air being pulled in to this storm. We're also looking at minimal wind shear right now on this kind of hypnotic map here with all the purples and yellows and reds. The purple represents low wind shear, so a favorable environment for this storm to develop as it drifts off to the northwest. Right now we have a big area of high pressure centered right over the eastern United States, and that's why it's been so windy the last couple of days. But that high pressure is going to weaken, it's going to move out in the Atlantic, and it's going to open up a gap where this storm can develop and move north, possibly impacting or making landfall in one of the Gulf Coast states. All right, here's a look at the European computer model. As I mentioned, there's still a lot of uncertainty, but we can go ahead and take a look at what the models are predicting right now. And the European is suggesting that this storm is going to move into the Gulf of Mexico, possibly becoming a tropical storm or a Cat 1 hurricane. And the European has a storm making landfall right around the Big Bend area of Florida as looks like a weak Cat 1 hurricane, which would bring some storm surge and some large surf to northern Tampa Bay and the Big Bend area. That's the European model. Here's a look at the GFS computer model. And same thing, takes a storm north into the Gulf of Mexico, develops it into a tropical storm or a weak hurricane, and then a farther west landfall, perhaps into Louisiana. That's what the American model is predicting to happen on Saturday night and Sunday. Here's a look at the Canadian model, and it's kind of calling for kind of a wacky solution here, one that I'm kind of tempted to disregard. The main area of low pressure moves off to the north and actually starts to combine with the northern end of the tropical wave, another low pressure. And when it does so, it actually does what's called the Fujiwara effect, where you get two tropical systems that are somewhat interacting and dancing with each other. and could even end up joining into one system. Regardless, the CMC, the Canadian model, has the primary low moving into Louisiana, but again, this is kind of a model run that I would prefer to discard. All right, here's a look at the IBM Deep Thunder model. Again, one of the newer models that we have access to this year. And let's take a look at this storm. As you can see, as it goes into the Gulf of Mexico, we're looking at the storm develop pretty quickly. The Deep Thunder model thinks that we're going to have a pretty decent hurricane on our hands, but it is one of the few models that is predicting a strong hurricane. Every other model is predicting a strong tropical storm or perhaps a weak Cat 1 hurricane. So if we end up having a strong hurricane, then we can give a shout out to the Deep Thunder model for being one of the only models to predict a stronger storm to develop. Regardless, as far as the path goes, a very similar path moving into Louisiana as we head into early Sunday afternoon. Again, that's according to the IBM Deep Thunder model. The last model I wanted to show you, again, there are tons of models out there, but I'm showing you the more trusty hurricane models that we've been dealing with. And this is one of those. This is the H-Wharf model, and the H-Wharf takes a storm into the Gulf of Mexico, and then similar forecast moves it in to right around New Orleans or perhaps coastal Mississippi as we move into late Saturday night and to Sunday. So here's a look at these spaghetti model plots, and as you can see, these spaghetti model plots are really kind of all over the place, anywhere from basically northern Florida all the way over to Louisiana. So still a lot of uncertainty, and again, until we get that defined center of circulation, that there will be that continued uncertainty. But with that said, here's a look at what the basic models are calling for. This is kind of the bottom line of what we're expecting at this point based on the current computer models. The GFS, the Canadian, the IBM, and the H-Wharf all have the tropical system moving into the Louisiana or perhaps Mississippi area on Saturday night or Sunday morning, and the GFS and the Canadian are much weaker with a tropical storm. The H-Wharf and the IBM are actually looking at possibly a decent hurricane moving into the area on Sunday. On the other hand, the National Hurricane Center is actually taking a track right up into the panhandle of Florida. The European model has taken a track right into the Big Bend area, European being the farthest east track of any of the computer models. And one of the things we look at when we're forecasting hurricanes and trying to determine which model is handling it better or which model may prevail, is we want to look at model consistency from run to run, and so far the models have not been consistent. The IBM, the CMC, the GFS have all shifted westward since yesterday. The National Hurricane Center and the European, they have shifted their track eastward. So the models are not agreeing, and they're not agreeing with themselves from day to day. Based on that, if I had to make a prediction at this point, based on these computer models and what's happening in the atmosphere, I would say that we would have landfall early Sunday morning in the very western panhandle of Florida, possibly as a Cat 1 hurricane. But still a lot to be watched. The storm hasn't even officially developed yet, so we'll be able to hash out the details once it moves north. Hopefully it will not develop. It'll just be a rainmaker for parts of the Gulf Coast, but right now it looks like everything is in order for a tropical storm or a hurricane to develop and possibly make landfall in the northern or northeastern Gulf Coast as we move into Saturday night or Sunday. All right, that's today's update. I'll have another update tomorrow with the latest information and computer models.